So let's begin. Our first talk today is of Doron Yashphe from Tel Aviv University on Perspectivity and Modality.
The aim of this lecture is to present an account, a reductive analysis, of modality in terms of perspectives. This is an expansion.
Maybe you should speak into the microphone.
Sure.
Just to make sure that the people hear it. Yeah.
Sure. This is an expansion on current literature, which began with Kit Fine's paper in 2005, Tense and Reality. There it began as a theory of time, but since then it has developed into other areas. According to such positions, reality is fundamentally fragmented into different perspectives, ontologically fragmented. This is not to say that reality is relative, whether it's supposed to be a sort of realism, where all facts, including perspectival facts, exist equally absolutely, and because we include perspectival facts, we have incompatibilities. And the incompatibilities are accounted for ontologically by thinking of the ontology as fragmented. Incompatibilities such as a person standing and sitting at different times, or different first personal experiences, or different possibilities. The incoherence which is accepted into the fundamental structure of ontology is what makes it a non-standard realism. As I understand it, there are already two different strands within this literature. One which focuses on the self-centeredness of perspectives and the phenomenology of adopting a perspective. And the other focuses just on the ontological incompatibilities. The way I think of it is in the other way, the second way. The first strand was presented, I think, by Ola Solomiak and Christian List's lectures at the first day of this conference. To think of reality as fragmented by perspectives objectively, I think we can understand this analogously to how we think of explanations. We can either think of explanation as someone explaining something or conjuring up an explanation, or we can think of explanation as always being, if they're true, then they're just out there in the world for us to pick out. They're not dependent on a person's activity or something like that. In the same way, I think of perspectives as just being there. The different spatial perspectives on the table are just here, even if there's no one adopting them. A major difference between the position which I'm about to present and current literature is that current literature treats cases which we already consider to be perspectival as treat them as fundamentally ontological. This account tries to think of all of reality as fragmented into perspectives. It does this by thinking of property instantiations as another sort of perspectivity. The idea is simple yet unintuitive. It means that we don't think of objects as having properties, but as properties as having objects. Different dogs, for instance, are different ways for dogness to be. Different roses are different perspective on roseness. Different people are like open windows into personhood or humanness, something like that. As you can see, this is the first translation on your handout. This means that I will translate "there is a rose" to "there is a perspective on roseness." There is a red rose, if and only if there is a perspective on roseness, which is also a perspective on redness. To see why this is plausible, let's think of Plato's early dialogues, where Socrates is looking for answers to the questions of what is X, where X is usually one of the virtues. When his interlocutors suggest that Hector is brave, or Socrates is wise, or Helen is beautiful, Socrates brushes these answers away as being uninformative. He is looking for a definition, not examples. But to me, it seems that they are at least somewhat informative. It's not that they're entirely uninformative. And it seems to me natural to say that they give us a perspective on the property we are trying to understand. Then if we think of different property instantiations as open windows into the property itself, the ante-re universal, we can think that if we would have all perspectives on the property, we would have a panorama view of it, and thus capturing all of the property. I think it's like going back into Plato's cave with an optimistic frame of mind. Plato's thought of instantiations as merely shadows of properties. But I think that even shadows are not that concealing. They tell us something about the contour, the size, the location, maybe even the texture of that of which they are properties. So if we think of instantiations as actually open windows, they can really tell us something about the properties. They capture the property from a certain perspective. To illustrate this one last time, let's think that we're in Paris and we want to see the Eiffel Tower, but we don't want to see it through the perspective of this window. So we go up close and we go and look at the Eiffel Tower, but round and round we go and all we find is just more perspectives. I think it would be strange to say that we don't see the tower, we just see perspectives on it. I think we are seeing the tower through and through these perspectives. I might exaggerate a bit and say that there is nothing really abstract about this case. It's just the case of properties. It's just another case of perspectivity. How is the one many then? It is a single property with many perspectives on it. How are the many one? It's many perspectives on a single property. Property instantiation just means that there is a perspective on a property. There's no, according to this, there's no problem with universals. We see them all the time. We have perceptions of forms. So this is how we start thinking of modality in this way, with the property instantiation as perspectives. And now to move up to modality, we have the following formulas on your translations, rather, on your handout. If different instantiations of a property are different ways for the property to be, then we can think of perspectives on this perspective, on the instantiation itself, as different ways for it to be. And thus capturing its possibilities. For instance, a dog is a perspective, a certain dog is a perspective on dogness, but we can have different perspective on this dog as being here or there, younger or older, playing or sleeping. These are its possibilities. Then according to this, possibility is just possibly, as you can see in your handout, possibly a rose is red, if and only if there is a perspective on roseness, which is also a perspective on redness. Necessity is interdefinable. Necessarily a rose is red, if and only if all perspectives on roseness are also perspectives on redness. To think of modality de re, we need to add individual essences. These can either be non-qualitative exeities or qualitative object essences, such as the object's composition, its spatio-temporal location, or its origin, or any other suggestion which seems reasonable. Then we can think of their possibility as the case of there being a perspective on an entity essence, and their necessity as being the case of all perspectives on a perspective on an entity essence being a certain way. And this brings us to the following formula on your handout, translation. Possibly Rosie the rose is red, if and only if there is a perspective on rosiness, which is also a perspective on redness. So according to this, the picture that emerges, at least how I think of it, I would love to hear your thoughts if this makes sense to you. Then reality is a sort of we can think of reality as a sort of a tree with the anterior universals as its seeds, and directly on it there are the instantiation perspectives, which can be thought of as the trunk, and on them there are the possibility perspectives, which can be thought of as the branches and leaves of the tree. So now I will try to think of this account similarities to other accounts of modality. First, I would like to compare it to Lewis's possible worlds. Both Lewis's possible worlds and this account replace talk of possibility and necessity with quantification over something. There's quantification over possible worlds. Here there's quantification over perspectives. There have already been 3 developments in the perspectivity literature of possible worlds, which think of possible worlds as a sort of perspectivity or fragmentality, by Samuel and Quinto, Yiwen Zan, and Ola Solomiak. So what I'm about to say about the difference between my perspectivity account and possible worlds account carries over to these expansions on to these understandings of possible worlds as well. Cowling explains that there are 2 kinds of parsimony. There is ontological parsimony and there is ideological parsimony. And just as in ontological parsimony, we're not interested in how many entities there are, we're interested in how many kinds of entities there are. It is the same with ideological parsimony, that we're not interested in how many primitive concepts we admit, but only with how many kinds of primitive concepts we admit. Now, it is not obvious how to parcel out concepts into kinds, but mind you that it is not obvious how to parcel out entities into kinds as well. And since ontology and ideology are you can exchange one for the other, it seems that ideological parsimony is just as important as ontological parsimony. The problem with possible world accounts, as Fine pointed out in his famous paper of 1994, is that they cannot account for essentiality. They cannot account for the case where Socrates is essential for the singleton Socrates, but not the other way around, because necessity is bidirectional. And in every, it's not fine-grained enough to account for essentiality. The perspectivity account I present here is fine-grained enough and can account both for necessity and essentiality. We've already seen how it accounts for necessity. The following translation on your handout is how it accounts for essentiality. Socrates is essential to the singleton set, of Socrates, and not vice versa, if and only if all perspectives on singleton Socratesness are also perspectives on Socratesness, and not all perspectives on Socratesness are also perspectives on singleton Socratesness. A second comparison I would like to make is to, so it shares ideology with possible worlds accounts, and this account shares ontology with property ontology accounts. There are two such accounts which explain modality as logical relations between anti-real universals, between properties. The first is by George Bieler, the second by Michael Jubian. They explain modality as being something is possible if possibility is understood as agreement between properties, and necessity is understood either as entailment or contradiction or identity between properties. As you can see on the quotation that I presented in the handout, both of these accounts, they have important differences, but they both, at the end, rest on intuition, that it is intuitive for us to understand what is a contradiction between properties or entailment between properties, and they don't present precise analysis for what this exactly is. The Perspectivity account does manage to present such precise analysis, as you can see the 4 translations there. Then roseness and redness agree, if and only if there is a perspective on roseness, which is also a perspective on redness. Roseness entails redness, if and only if all perspectives on roseness are also perspectives on redness. Roseness contradicts redness, if and only if no perspectives on roseness are also perspectives on redness. And roseness is identical to redness, if and only if all perspectives on roseness are also perspectives on redness, and vice versa. The last feature I would like to point out, and the last comparison I would like to make of this account, is with accounts that validate the Barkan formula. The Barkan formula is needed for the best and simplest quantified model logic. You have the formula on your handout. It's usually thought of as if there could have been something that was such and such, then there is something that could have been such and such. The Perspectivity account accounts for this because if there is a possibility, if it is possibly somehow, this means that there is a perspective on this somehow. And therefore, the traditional accounts of modality which validate this formula postulate some sort of possibilia to account for the formula, the existence of some sort of possibilia. One major important problem with this is that it seems to require thinking of ways of being, that some things exist and some things actually exist, other things are just possible subsistence or something like that. In order to avoid this, there are more modern sophisticated accounts by Linsky and Zalta, and independently by Timothy Williamson, which replace the actual possible distinction with the concrete abstract distinction. The idea is that all entities exist in all possible worlds, yet some are concrete in some possible worlds, in those worlds in which you would say that they are actual, and abstract in others, the worlds in which we would say that they are possible. Then they think of possibility not as a different sort of existence, but just as a special kind of regular existence, and a sort of abstractness, which is okay. Thinking of possibilia the way this account does, as a special case of, there are two problems with these more sophisticated accounts. One is that they don't require a special kind of existence, but they do seem to require a special kind of entity, which is only contingently abstract, unlike mathematical entities, for instance, which are always abstract or necessarily abstract. These are contingently abstract entities, which might be problematic. And another problem is that these accounts do not explain the connection between possibilia and actualia, which the formula seems to suggest. The formula talks about possibly something to there is something. It seems to suggest some kind of a connection. The perspectivity accounts validates the Barkan formula without postulating a special sort of entity nor a special sort of existence, because it's just more perspectives. It's perspectives on properties and perspectives on perspectives on properties. It's just another case. And it explains the connection between possibilia and actualia as that of metaphysical dependence. There could only be a perspective on a property if the first perspective exists. If there is no perspective, there is no perspective on a perspective. Yeah, that is it.